Thank you so much to the Wild Gentleman for that beautiful showcase. Next up, what if you could live forever? Your society keeps on destroying and rebuilding itself, all because of a select elite chasing their own motives. Paradise Killer is an absolute banger of a game. Bright visuals, an open world full of hidden treasures, and most importantly, who killed the council? The people that were supposed to keep them in check. Well, you'll have to find that out for yourself. But now we have Barry Epoch, the composer of the soundtrack, who is gonna showcase and talk about it with some of his friends. Let's tune in.
Hello and welcome. I am Phil from Kaizen Gameworks and I am joined by.
Hi, I'm Barry Topping. I was the composer and sound designer on Paradise Killer by Kaizen Gameworks.
Mm, and we are here for Save and Sound to talk to you about that soundtrack for Paradise Killer, which has been out now for about 7 months, 7 or 8 months.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I love the soundtrack. We've been blown away by the response we've had to it, and all through development, like we loved every part of that soundtrack. It really kept us going. So we thought it might be interesting to kind of dip into some of the influences behind the soundtrack and come sort of dissect a couple of the tunes as well. They've got a few we want to talk about.
Mm.
So I guess we should really jump straight in and say that Paradise Killer is very influenced by city pop, right? That's the main thing. So when we first came to you and we said we want a game with a city pop soundtrack, which is quite unusual in itself, where did you go from there?
Well, the first song I wrote for Paradise Killer was the main theme, Paradise Stay Forever, which is like our vocal theme and is sort of a quintessential city pop song. Quintessential in the way that it's like the instrumentation of it, the arrangement of it, and obviously the style of it is like very city pop influenced. Um, But the thing that I really want to do with Paradise is I should say there's a whole video where I talk about specifically Paradise Stay Forever that's on the Kaizen YouTube channel. It's called
Mm,
Music for Paradise. And I talk about kind of that track there. So you should go and take a look at that. One thing I wanted to do was try and take city pop sounds, but make them sound more modern in terms of how a slightly modern mix. Like still use 80s, 70s influenced sounds, but just make it sound a bit crisper.
mm,
Because I mean, right away, if when you play Paradise Killer, you realize that even though it's inspired by things, it's not shackled by those things. So even Paradise Stay Forever itself is, it's a city pop song, but it kind of lurches in some slightly different directions
mm,
at times. So yeah, that was the first song I wrote, and then I kind of quickly realized that Paradise Killer is sort of a sum of its influences, and I really wanted the soundtrack to be the same, not just because I didn't want the entire thing to be just city pop, but there's quite a broad umbrella for genres of that style, like vaporwave, city pop, synthwave. And I think it's interesting that vaporwave, especially, is I never set out to write a vaporwave soundtrack, but it's what I see identified as most, which I
mm.
think is kind of fun. So I didn't expect that, so that's fun. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's not a thing I thought as well. Like to me, it was always very definitely city pop, but I suppose
yeah,
tied in with the visuals, that vaporwave influence does come through, and it's got that very kind of DIY feel to it. Like that inspires the vaporwave, and I think it's because you try to blend a few different genres in there and make something unique. That's where
yeah.
that vaporwave sits for me.
Well, that's something I really liked about it is I could approach tunes from a almost like a different point of fidelity for different songs. By fidelity, I don't necessarily mean quality, but something like I don't know. Midori Eyes is a good example of something that has what I would class as slightly cheaper drum sounds. I don't
Mm,
mean cheap in a bad way, but in a way that doesn't have to sound like modern, cutting edge. It's This soundtrack was really inspired by a lot of like 90s video game soundtracks, where I always explain it as like when video game music moved away from chiptune and started using Red Book audio, and people were just like pulling sounds and samples off the synths that were available at the time. They
mm,
created some really original, striking music, and that's kind of what inspired me. Is not necessarily going for the sounds that are classed as the best, but that had the sort of best character for the variety of tracks that I was creating, right?
Mm,
So the Paradise Killer soundtrack as a whole is city pop, jazz fusion, 90s dance pop, video gamey inspired music that pulls in different directions but can all be unified under the umbrella of what Paradise Killer is, which to me is the familiar through a new lens in a
mm,
way that vaporwave is. Vaporwave is like harks back to a time that didn't really exist. Like, I mean, it borrows things from reality, but vaporwave is its own. It's nostalgia for something that never really existed. And so, yeah, I guess when I was writing a lot of the music, that was something I had in mind: is how can we make something that is all that has a through line, right, but
mm.
is different enough to stand as a 90-minute collection of music. So it's not just all the same tune for 90 minutes.
That's something that stands out for me because um, I think when you say we want a city pop soundtrack or whatever genre you pick, it's very easy to look at popular songs or look at other games that have used that same genre and then come up with something quite similar, and it can still be different. But what you did was you did find that through line, and from that first track, "Stay Forever," you kept bringing these musical elements back to create something that was different. It didn't always feel like you were trying to make the next big and then reference
Yeah.
some prior city pop track. It was always about what fit the game and what fit the other tracks in that soundtrack. And I think that's why it makes a good soundtrack. Like, obviously, it really works in the game, but it also really works as a standalone soundtrack, which is to me pretty special.
Yeah, I mean, the reason that works so well is partly because of the way the audio system works. Like, originally, I was kind of, I mean, I guess apprehensive about having a playlist system where you have to trust the player to go and find your work. You know what I mean? 'Cause
Mm.
my original fear is like, I'm going to write all this music, and what if people don't find it? They're not going to hear that. But that in its own way started to become something that I was like, that I love that because it
Mm.
means everyone has their own experience. And when people realize they have a playlist system and they can listen to whatever tracks they want in whatever order, it
Mm.
yeah, it worked. We managed to get enough styles in there that I feel like there is appropriate music for different situations, and I
Mm.
was hope that people can play that way if they want. I mean, it's there for the player to interact with, right? So
Yeah.
all I had to do was provide a wide enough series of songs that people were getting what they wanted from the soundtrack, and I feel like we did that.
Mm. So I should have really started this by explaining what Paradise Killer is. So I'll quickly do that now. If you haven't played it, Paradise Killer is an open world murder mystery. And in context, to put it in context of what Barry was just saying, freedom, player freedom is a big thing for us in Paradise Killer. We always wanted to let you go out and play the game how you wanted to. And part of that is being able to customize your soundtrack as well. So as you go through the game, you will be able to collect these new pieces of music from points around the world. So that's a really nice reward. And then you can craft that into your own playlist. And what that means is any song can be playing anywhere at any time. And it's a real challenge to make that work because a lot of games will have a certain track for, the nighttime and another one for a daytime, or it might have um, a certain piece of music for a dramatic moment. Whereas in Paradise Killer, nearly all the tracks had to work in nearly all the situations, and I think you managed to pull that off really well.
Well, I remember that when we had the very first discussions about Paradise Killer, the original thing I thought, because it was open world, I had this idea of, well, I mean, you had the idea too that there's areas, and when you leave one area and go into another area, it plays a bit of music. And had all these thoughts about day and night cycle and stuff. So I feel like if we'd gone with what seemed obvious, it wouldn't have worked as well. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'm
I
glad
think
that we made the decision to do that.
it's definitely a case that I think, like you said, it could have worked. And in fact, there are a couple of cases in the game where we do have very area specific music to change the tone a bit. But in general, um, because the soundtrack was good enough to kind of stand alone and for each track to be used in a variety of ways, it became more powerful that you had the choice of when to play it as well. And we really wanted to support that, so you can easily skip tracks with the D-pad. So or you can skip forward, you can skip backwards, and just letting the player have that experience of being able to enjoy the game and the soundtrack together I think really helped kind of sell both of them rather than it being a game with a soundtrack or a soundtrack with a game. It's almost one product.
Yeah, I mean, it really helped from a sort of like post-release point of view when the soundtrack has to doesn't have to stand as its own thing, but we really wanted it to stand as its own thing. It
Mm,
almost becomes because the thing is in Paradise Killer, the music is a soundtrack.
mm,
It's like a diegetic real world collection of music. So when we made the soundtrack, it's like it's been pulled out of the game into the
yeah,
real world, and it's like here you go now. You can get this on CD, just like they would
yeah.
have had in
I
Island
mean,
Sequence
and that
24.
is crazy, isn't it? Like you can go and get that on a CD and on a vinyl now, and I think that is when we started out on this path of making Paradise Killer. Ollie, the other founder of Kaizen, he and I were talking and said, "Wouldn't it be amazing if we could get a soundtrack that was good enough to go on vinyl?" And here we are, and that's come out, and it's absolutely amazing. And we'll give you the links to get all of those at the end of the video, so stick around for them.
Yeah, I feel like when we were designing our soundtrack, our sort of physical soundtrack releases too, I think we really made an effort to make them fit as again products that could exist within the world of Paradise Killer, right?
Mm,
We didn't just want to just put the cover art on it and be like, there it is.
yeah.
Because I think there's so much rich thematic material in Paradise Killer. It's
Mm,
like in the soundtrack, I always say this, but it's amazing for me as a composer that the soundtrack got to be such a big part of the game because yeah, obviously I'm a strong advocate for having strong like soundtracks that are a huge part of the game because I'm a composer. But yeah, being able to do that and then how that ties into the world and then how the world of Paradise Killer tied into
mm,
the soundtrack, I think it's just like a really nice kind of symbiotic relationship, right?
yeah. Well, and I think that does show if you listen to the lyrics of the title track, which is "Stay Forever," you tied those lyrics into the game so well because you wrote those lyrics, and it's I think it's somewhat unusual to have that. You know, these days a lot of if you get the title track for a film or a game, it's often just a track that's been bought and put on that
Uh,
attached to the IP. It's not written for it, and even if it has, it doesn't necessarily derive so heavily from the source material, but it
I
does.
think we were treading a there's like a line of like there. I mean, there's a lot of great video game themes, but I think about Snake Eater. I love Snake Eater, but it
Mm,
is so literal. It's like it's a song about Snake Eater, right?
hmm
And when I was writing the lyrics, I wanted to be like, well, this is a song about Paradise Killer, but not not someone on the outside looking into Paradise Killer, like someone singing "It's out September 4th on Nintendo Switch," that kind of thing. Nothing that literal. So, when
yeah,
I was writing the lyrics, I wanted to make them again seem like lyrics that existed in the world. And I
yeah,
saw people saying like, "Oh, this is definitely from the perspective of Crimson Acid singing about Lady Love Dies." And it's like it isn't, but
it
if
could
you say
be.
it is, then it is. It definitely
Yeah,
is. Like it could be. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. I mean, I'm going to be saying this a lot. I'm going to be saying the words, "This is exactly what I wanted to do," a lot.
yeah.
But I'm really happy with those lyrics. I
Mm.
think they're a great fit for the tune. So, why not?
Yeah, I mean, we've been very gushing about this, or at least I certainly have, and it's because, as I said at the start, I really like the soundtrack, and it blows me away that we were able to attach it to this game that we were making. Um, and yeah, it's just really interesting to kind of hear your approach because obviously from a kind of I've developed the game, and whilst I'd love to write the music, I've just not got that level of talent at all. So it's really interesting to hear how you approach it from the other side, which is as a musician, as a composer, how do you add that to the game? Whereas we look at it from the game, how do we add the soundtrack? And yeah,
I think it was lucky that the initial vision was so well defined that even at the point of game development, I came into pretty much 90% of the ideas I was writing. Once they were in the game, I was like, "Yep, this fits," and that's to do, like I said, how well defined the original vision was. Because even from that, even from like the design document, I could take exactly what I needed for the entire project and basically run with it. And I had the freedom to do that. It's another important thing too, is like you guys were very good at just letting me get on with it, which is how we got so much work done in 6 months. So
yeah, and that is another amazing thing that this soundtrack, what is it, 80, 85 minutes?
Aye.
Yeah, all of that done in 6 months is quite amazing. So it's probably time we go through and go through a few of these
Yeah,
tracks.
let's talk about these amazing tracks that we can
Yes,
just
yeah,
play.
actually get into one. So there's three that we're going to talk about today, and I think the best thing to do here is just jump into the first one. Do you want to introduce it?
Yep, this is Ego 24/7. Ego 24/7 is obviously a very 90s inspired dance pop song, right? And it's structure originally this had vocals, but we decided for various reasons we weren't going to use them. Mostly because it would have broken the flow of the rest of the songs being instrumental, right? So a lot of the songs are written in a kind of A B style, but this is one that's more written like verse bridge chorus, which is because at one point it did have vocals. So it's a lot of really 90s drum sounds and it's quite synth heavy. I mean a lot of the songs are synth heavy, but this is one that's like really synth heavy. All the bass, everything apart from the piano and the sax really. Um so it has this kind of like video gamey 90s jazz fusion lead for the verse because when we took the vocals out for a long time it didn't have this verse part, which is like a wee kind of keyboard part, right? And there's I think there's different ways to approach instrumental music where you can approach it as something very structured. Like, if you play blues, for example, a lot of blues tunes have pretty much the exact same structure, and a lot of jazz standards as well have the same kind of structures, right? But this is one that because it was already structured like a pop song, I was like, it should have a verse, right? So this is where kind of this wee synthy lead in the verse came from, which is then replicated for the second verse, and the chorus has its own different synthy part. So it's a lot of different kind of sections, I think, on first listen. But when you keep in your head that it is structured like a pop song, then I think it makes a lot of sense. And it has an absolutely ripping sax solo from our main man, Fabian Hernandez. Shout out to Fabian. We love that guy. And he did some really instrumental stuff on bringing this track together because when you're working on a track, you're always you're always going to be happy with your own work to a degree, but it sometimes takes a long time for a track to kind of tip over into like, yes, I love it. And with a few of the tracks on this, as soon as I put the sax in, I was like, we've done it. And one of my favorite part of the song is right at the end, and it really beds the sax thematically with the rest of the tune, where it goes back to the kind of chorus melody but played starts off as a unison on the synth and the saxophone and then ends as a harmony on the synth and the saxophone. So that was something I wanted to do because I like the idea of how a song builds and how elements combine, and then I wanted like a big climax. So yeah, you get that really cool climax. And I remember mixing that, and it was quite hard to mix, but it was one of those things where I was like, if I get this right, I'm going to be delighted with it. And then I was. And my second favorite bit is that very very end bit with a wee soft squelchy wow wow synth chords, and that was just something I did. I was just when I was mixing the sax, I just had like a hand on the keyboard playing over it, and I did that at the end, and I was like, "That's
Nice.
it." Aye. So there was like
I've never
tons
thought
of
of
wee
it as
happy
squelchy.
accidents. Aye. The I think it was different as well is I'm a guitarist, so I used to primarily write on guitar, and then I kind of fell out of love with guitar a wee bit and started primarily writing on like mouse and keyboard, right? Like in a sequencer and like a DAW. But for Paradise Killer, I wrote everything pretty much on the piano, like or on the synth. And I think it's really important, especially when you're writing synthy music, that you write it on a patch that you've either made or that you've found, because there's so much articulation in the sound. I mean, a synthesizer can sound like anything, right? And I know in the case of Ego, it just sounds like kind of 80s, 90s sounds. But yeah, there's tons of wee happy accidents in that tune that I was just, yeah, really happy with. And I think it's this and probably Lemmajet and Bop and House
Mm.
of Bliss are like the three kind of 90s New Jack Swing dance pop influence tracks on the soundtrack. When it has a broader range of styles, you write this track and you write this track, and they have nothing to do with each other.
Mm.
There are tracks that have no common elements with one another on the Paradise Killer soundtrack, and it makes me kind of nervous when I was writing stuff that was like similar but really different. But as you write more tracks, they fill in the blanks, and this is what I keep talking about. This through line is like, even though your track A and track Z have nothing to do with each other, through the through line through the other tracks, they do all tie together.
Mm.
And also musical themes is something I like to bring back. And there's a musical theme from Paradise Stay Forever in Ego 24/7. In the verse it has the be, which
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's picked up on that, so
Right. Well, we're getting on in time, so shall we jump into the next song?
yep, do it.
Do you want to introduce?
Yeah, this is Sunset Song. So there are a lot of pretty maximalist tunes on the soundtrack in terms of arrangement, in terms of what's happening harmonically, melodically. Last Dance XX is one of my favorites, but that is like the thickest, richest tune on the soundtrack. And something like Sunset Song is the polar opposite of this in pretty much every way. This is like a kind of stripped back like band piece. It's like you can play it with four people. It's like a four-piece band song, right? And I really imagined it as that, which is why the drums I think are incredibly important, because there's nothing flashy at all. Like, I played the drums on the keyboard, and they're supposed to sound like this drummer's not, he's just totally jobbing. Like, it's just because it didn't have to be anything flashy, because there are so many other moments in the soundtrack that are. So the entire thing is just like chill, piano driven guitar bass song that is treated in a way to make it sound a bit more mid-fire, a bit more vintage, but it's really just there as a moment of calm, and yeah, as an antithesis to the sort of heavier arrangement songs on the soundtrack.
It definitely is a song where I think, if I'm gonna sit outside in an evening with a drink and relax, this is that song. It's kind of non-challenging. It's just there, a really good way to relax, and I love it. It's I'm always going to say, like, it's my second favorite, but there's so many good songs. I'm not sure, but it's certainly up there as one of my favorite songs on the soundtrack. And perhaps one of my biggest regrets is that you actually did ask if I could play the drums on this one,
Aye.
and
By the way,
I
what I was saying earlier wasn't related to that. I wasn't like, you can
no.
get a total jobber to play
Well,
drums on this.
that's interesting. Like, I mean, I do play the drums. I'm not a very good recording drummer. I tend to need the energy of a band to play with, and this track does not need energy. And at the time, I was just really busy finishing the game, so I didn't really have time to sit and do it. And I think even if I had, I would struggle to give it justice, because that song just needs that laid back, non fractious, non-frantic approach, and that's the way I tend to play drums. I tend to play them with energy and with aggression, and that just does not work in this track at all. So it probably
Aye.
worked out for the best, but I was for a while I was dreaming of being able to do the drums, but just
It would have been
didn't
good.
happen.
It's the only song that has like a proper acoustic drum sound as well.
Mm,
Like, it doesn't have like a big snare, or like it's not like a drum machine or anything. It's
mm,
just, it's like an acoustic drum sound.
yeah.
Yeah, and instrumentation wise, it's really simple. There's like just an acoustic drum sound. It's me playing guitar, me playing bass, and it's like a Prophet. I think it's just a wee synth pad, and then a piano. And that's pretty much it through to the end. And then there's some strings, like synth strings at the end. But yeah, just like it's really pared back compared to the
Yeah.
others.
It is a nice break in the soundtrack when you get it. you can just feel yourself relaxing as you're walking around the island with it, and serves its purpose beautifully. Right, so let's move on to the last track.
Cool. This last track is appropriately enough called "End of the World." I thought this tune was going to be a hard sell, and I feel like maybe it was a bit of a hard sell at first because it's kind of off the wall. But this, the whole game is about like it's a cosmic horror. It's about alien gods and like massive slaughter and like all the themes about the council and that and their sort of greed and their hubris. And it's like I really wanted some one track at least. I mean, with the exception of Temple of Tears, which is kind of literally like the music of a god, right? I
Mm.
wanted one tune that was still under the umbrella, but could encompass a feeling of grandeur within its kind of small box, and it has that kind of. I always say it's like that mariachi Castlevania bit at the start, like kind of
Mhm.
diminished trumpet
Yeah.
run, and like uh, to have that intro, which I think is a really nice theme. It's like kind of it's trumpets and a clavinet and big guitar chord, so it's like a big like the song has begun to
Mhm.
just instantly that melts away into kind of like cosmic dub. I mean, it was like kind of dub reggae inspired, right? But
Mm.
not with the sounds of dub, like still with like the same big 80s snare that we've been using in some of the other tracks, right? To
Yeah.
just again pull that sound palette in. Aye, so it goes very ham at the start and then very calm, and then again you get this A section and this B section, and then on the return to the kind of reggae section, there's like a big 20 bar keyboard solo, which was an absolute joy to record because this tune is properly like you are watching the world end. It's like you're sitting on your porch drinking a beer, watching the end of the world, and there's nothing you can do about it because that's kind of the Paradise Killer MO. It's like all this bad shit has happened, and it's going to keep happening, and really nothing you can do about it. So
Mm.
it's like a kind of it's an arrogant song almost in the way that it yeah just feeds back into this idea of the world's over, but look at all this opulence that we have and
Yeah.
how this continues. And so yeah, we have that really again opulent keyboard solo, and then this outro section is like the kind of big epic grandeur that I was talking about, right?
Yeah.
We have it's like this big kind of like thumping like kind of orchestral percussion and like a big kind of it's like suspenseful 80s piano, and this builds and builds. There's lots of strings, like big strings, big choir, and then it pulls in again themes from Paradise Stay Forever, and then again it sort of melts away at the end to yeah, basically what I see as a reprise of
Mm.
Paradise Stay Forever. This kind of percussion intro that you get on Paradise comes back at the end of the world. Aye, and so that's like a tune of real peaks and troughs, but it definitely has the biggest build on the soundtrack because I always pictured it in my head as like it's the last track. And I know it doesn't work that way because players pick up tracks in whatever order they
Mm.
want, but this song is intended to be a finale of sorts for the
Yeah.
soundtrack. Yeah, which is
Definitely.
why it kind of hits so hard.
Yeah. And in fact, on the soundtrack, is it the last
It's
full
pretty
track on?
it's
Yeah.
pretty late on. It's kind of lesser lesser tunes after that.
So we're pretty much out of time, which is a shame because we kind of want to talk a bit about sound design as well.
I can
Uh,
summarize that super quickly. My
yeah,
approach to sound design is you tie the music into the sound design, and that's it.
there you go.
It's magic.
Worth watching the video just for that tip, right?
I talked
So,
about that too, so in some of our videos. So please
yeah,
go and check out our YouTube channel. There's some wee bits and pieces on there. So
perfect. So all that's left to say is that you can get Paradise Killer on Steam and on Switch, and of course you can get the soundtrack on Steam as well. But you can also get it on Bandcamp, and you can get the vinyls. Can you still get the vinyls?
Yes, you can get the vinyl. If you're in the US, you can get the vinyl from Ship to Shore Records. I believe you can also get our CD there. And if you're in Europe, you can get the vinyl from Black Screen Records. You can also get the CD there. And if you're in the UK, you can get it from Chip Freak, spelled FREQ, and they have the vinyl and the CD also.
Excellent. So, yeah, feel free to go and support all of that. And thank you very much for watching us.